This is Professor McDonald, and this will be some comments relative to Chapter 3, the crime scene. It is important to understand that effective police officers understand the value of a crime scene and of the evidence potential that can be recovered at a crime scene. Whether you're the first patrol officer on the scene or whether you're a criminal investigator responsible for conducting the investigation of the reported crime. So let's talk about some of the actions that do take place. Again, this is a very fundamental and important aspect of criminal investigation. And really, in many cases, our book talks about this, the actual investigative process begins at the scene of the crime after a crime has been reported. Much of police work is reactive. A crime has been reported, the police react to it, and then as an investigative standpoint, you have the known things that you encounter at the crime scene and the information you obtain from witnesses, and you have to work backwards in time to try to find out the unknown things that you need to resolve. One of the most important events that can occur is the first responder, the first police officer that gets to the scene. This person is very critical, not only in the response, but also ultimately later on when the crime scene is actually processed for evidence. If the responding officer does not react properly in a way consistent with his training, there's several things that can happen. Number one, more people can become injured if he doesn't secure the crime scene, and number two, evidence can be destroyed. So it's really that first action is the responding officers is to render the crime scene safe and to control movement of persons and officers in and out of the area. And what I mean by rendering it safe, you might come upon a crime scene where there's a suspect that's running away from the crime scene. This person could be armed. You also could encounter individuals or victims at the crime scene that have been injured that need to be dealt with. Safety is paramount. And essentially, your first responsibility is to neutralize the crime scene. That'd be a good question, to neutralize the crime scene and making it safe for other personnel to enter the area. And again, you're also going to be looking for witnesses. It's important. Let's say you do come upon a crime scene. It's important that witnesses are separated. They talk about this in the book, and I can't tell you enough. If you allow witnesses to a crime to get together, they'll start talking amongst each other. It'll influence their independent recollection of events, and this is categorized in the textbook as what's called retroactive interference. And this is where an individual will hear somebody else talking about a crime that they are also a witness to, and they tend to adopt some of this information as their own. And so essentially what happens is you can get somewhat of a biased recollection. So it's important that the first responding officers to the crime scene make sure the witnesses are identified and separated so they can be properly interviewed. As an investigator in my career who's responded to multiple crime scenes, many of them, and some of the students in this class have had the same experience, it's important when you first get there is to kind of just assess the situation, see exactly what you have, what type of crime has occurred, what is the potential for uncovering evidence that might help resolve the crime. You need to set up your boundaries. What is the crime scene itself? The crime scene could be something as small as the inside of a car or as large as several miles. And what I mean, think about an airplane disaster where a terrorist puts a bomb in an airplane, and you could have debris and evidence scattered over miles in the countryside. So you're normally not going to encounter that type of crime scene, but it is important to set those boundaries. You'll see them at times. They'll put, I like the idea of putting up tape, and that's just a warning to people not to come in and out of that crime scene. It's also important for those first officers to get to the crime scene to make sure that they control access in and out. And I'll tell you a story here in a little bit of how a crime scene or a crime may not have been resolved had not the crime scene been protected. The second major function that occurs is the investigators that are involved in actually processing the crime scene, looking for evidence. In our textbook, they talk, I'm not going to repeat what they've written, there's multiple procedures that are mentioned in the textbook. I've used them all, and at times I've used more than one at the same crime scene. The focus of the crime scene search and the crime scene investigation is to obviously gather evidence, collect it properly, so that it can be, hopefully you can develop information that'll connect the suspect to the crime. If you can't do this, many times you're going to have a hard time getting a conviction in a criminal case if you can't actually tie the suspect into the crime itself, and at the crime scene is where you're going to find much of that evidence. It's interesting, you see on TV they have CSI comes in and processes all these crime scenes. Well, that's not the way it works in the real world. If you're in a small department and you respond to a crime, depending on the type of crime, you might have to do everything yourself. You might be the first responder, the person that processes the crime scene, collects the evidence, interviews the witnesses. Sometimes you'll have some people with you to help you. Now, if it's a major event, then you could have, especially in major departments, you could have a crime scene expert team come in and process the scene for you. I worked on two major mail bombing cases. One of them resulted in the death of a U.S. appeals court judge in Birmingham, Alabama. And in that particular case, the FBI was the lead agency, along with the postal inspectors and ATF. And the crime scene itself was processed by the FBI lab personnel. They flew them in from Washington, along with personnel from the postal inspectors crime lab in Northern Virginia. And they actually did the crime scene processing. I saw that again in another major mail bomb case that I worked where the victim did survive, and an individual had mailed a bomb from California in the mail to an individual on the East Coast. It exploded. He did survive. The crime scene was unbelievable, but we did a good and adequate job in protecting the crime scene, and our crime scene team from the laboratory actually flew in and processed the crime scene. And it was critical because you never know what type of small piece of evidence might help you solve the case. And in that particular case, I remember seeing the room where the bomb had exploded, and probably the biggest piece of evidence in there was the size of a postage stamp. Well, they actually collected one. They went in with a vacuum cleaner and swept up everything, took it back to the crime lab, and reconstructed the parcel itself that contained the pipe bomb. And they found one of the stamps, you know, the size of the tip of your finger. And on the back of that stamp, they recovered a fingerprint, which connected us to the suspect and ultimately led to his conviction. Had that crime scene been contaminated by the first officer letting people walk in and out, that stamp could have stuck to somebody's foot and walked right out the door. So it's very important that these crime scenes are properly controlled and protected. Normally what will happen is, let's say on a major crime, and if you look at some of the photos in the textbook, the investigators will go in, they'll examine the crime scene, either one or two or together. They'll identify pieces of evidence. They'll mark them where they're located. They won't collect them. They'll mark them where they're located. I'm talking about a major crime scene where you have some help. You're not doing this by yourself. They'll mark the individual pieces of evidence. They'll have perhaps one officer who's responsible for collecting evidence and establishing a chain of custody. And that officer, and before they actually take a piece of evidence, let's say you have a weapon that's at the crime scene and it's been marked, they'll photograph it. They'll normally put some sort of measuring device like a ruler next to it just to give some scope as to the size of the weapon. You'll photograph it. I think I've already said that. Sometimes you can videotape a crime scene. There's a lot of different things you do. I was trained on doing sketches as well. And so you could actually have someone sketching the crime scene. You could have photographs. You could have a videotape. There's multiple ways. There's normally one officer that actually collects the evidence at the crime scene. He might have somebody assisting him. So he goes around and he photographs, picks it up, collects it, puts it in the bags, whatever they're using, whatever containers they're using to collect the evidence, and he establishes that chain of custody. Make sure you know what chain of custody is. And this shows that wherever the evidence goes, it has to be properly documented who is responsible for it. So if I collect evidence at a crime scene and then I turn it over to the crime lab, well, I have to document that with my signature, the person who receives its signature. If you have a break in this chain of custody, it could affect you in trial. You also have to be careful with certain types of evidence because you can be exposed to dangerous diseases when processing a crime scene. Let's say, for example, needles. Let's say you have drug users at the scene where there are needles that are being collected, and those individuals could have hepatitis, they could have AIDS. So we have to be very, very careful in this part of the process. They talk a lot about packaging. I'm not going to repeat all that, but the key thing with packaging is you make sure, let's say if it's blood samples, you make sure you don't package it in something like plastic, which could actually affect the bacterial composition of the collected item. Of course, one of the goals of doing a crime scene examination is to collect evidence that hopefully will identify suspect and other individuals that may have useful information. So then we conduct once the crime scene has been processed, then you want to search for more witnesses and you follow the evidence as to wherever it'll take you. Witnesses are critical to resolving investigations. One of the ways to do it is if, let's say you come upon a crime scene, and they talk about this in the book, you come upon a crime scene where you have no witnesses, and maybe you have a deceased individual and it's a suspicious death and it's in a neighborhood, well, you would go out and do a neighborhood canvass. You would interview neighbors to try to develop witnesses who may have seen something that may impact the crime. That's what they're talking about when they're talking about neighborhood canvasses. The media can also be used to assist the police by putting out information, especially if you have suspects or if you're looking for particular witnesses. These are all important aspects of the crime scene aspect of the crime scene. So again, let's just in retrospect, real quick, those first officers are very important. If they don't do their job properly, number one, people could be hurt because when you get to a crime scene, you never know who's still there. You could still have a suspect in the area, and that person could be dangerous. You also may have victims, so you have to render aid to those individuals and make sure that they get treatment, or maybe they have to be transported to the hospital. You have to protect the crime scene so individuals that from the outside cannot contaminate the crime scene and possibly contaminate evidence. You want to have the investigators will come in, they'll identify the evidence at the crime scene that is they see provides value. They will collect that evidence. They have to maintain a chain of custody, and that evidence, hopefully, it'll help you, number one, prove the elements of the crime, what they call the corpus delicti of the crime. It'll also help you, hopefully, link it to a suspect and identify other potential witnesses that may be of use. Again, this is a very, very important part of criminal investigation is that crime scene. And the good thing is, if you go into law enforcement, whether it's at a local, state, or federal level, you're going to get trained on how your department or your agency processes crime scenes, and with that training and with that knowledge, hopefully you'll reduce the opportunity to make mistakes. But you can if you do make some severe mistakes at the crime scene, there's a possibility that evidence could walk out of there without being collected that would ultimately have solved the case. And that'll end the tape for Chapter 3.